So sweeping somebody is basically, you know how like when you're cleaning, you kind of push somebody out of the way, right? Like, hey, I'm in this space, get out. You don't do that because you extend beyond you. You don't end here. You end out here somewhere. And so if somebody they could grab you, they could take your soul. And so you have to say, excuse me, because that tells the soul, oh, I didn't mean you. And so that's why you say it. You don't do it. It's just not okay. And that's actually not at all uncommon. Trust me, your mom's not weird. Just so you know. Yeah, not at all. I used to work with a woman who, she would, after she finished working every day, she would look around her workstation and collect all of her stray hairs, and like look at the back of her chair. She had like, she didn't have a little, you know, pet hair remover thing. She would roll over it. And I was like, are you hiding from the cops? Like, I'm thinking Gattaca, right? Like, I'm thinking she has assumed someone else's identity and we're going to find out that she's not because she's left skin, right? And she was like, no, I know none of you bitches like me. And I was like, she's right. She was a swamp woman. Do you know what I mean by swamp woman? She was a swamp woman. She was from the bayou. She was a swamp woman. She was scary. She had like chicken feet and she was scary. So we did all this and I was like, oh, okay, so you're worried we're going to do some sort of hoodoo. She was like, it's not hoodoo, it's voodoo. Hoodoo's a different thing. So I was like, well, we're not going to do that. She's like, oh, maybe. Just clean up the whole place. Okay, fine, whatever, crazy. But you know what? Now having spent some time, I see why she did it. It can be very terrifying. I don't go to any extents, by the way, because as an anthropologist, you know how everybody gets a piece of the elephant. You also have to believe in the other person's piece of the elephant, right? And if I don't agree that my hair is going to cause me problems, then you can't make it happen for me. Yay, anthropology. So, because I have to believe too for it to work out. All over the world, and what we call rites of passage. The first guy to really write about this was Arnold Van Gennep, although several people have written after, Victor Turner probably more famously. And what he said was, in every person's life, we go through several changes, and these changes are usually marked by a rite of passage ceremony. So, and during these rites of passage ceremonies, you can tell they are a rite of passage ceremony because they have three components: separation, transition, and incorporation. Transition is also sometimes called limbo. So let us take your birth. During your birth, you go through an actual physical separation. You leave your mother, right? You were in her, and now you're on the outside. Then they cut your cord, and then they hand you to your mother. Although at that point, that rite of passage isn't done for you. It is for her. Because typically when they hand the baby back to the mother, they say, here you go, Mom. Before that, she was Mrs. So-and-so. When they handed the baby, Mom. Her transition is complete. She has changed statuses. She is no longer a pregnant lady. She's Mom. So that transitionary period has to be relatively short, though, because if it is not short, if it lasts too long, it can be very, very dangerous. So let's take the example of getting married. We start with engagement. You are engaged. Someone asks you to marry them, or you ask them to marry them, and they say yes. Are you single? No. Are you married?
No.
No. Shit, you're in between. Right? So now you are neither fish nor fowl. This is transition, this is limbo. This is why you cannot have 6- and 8-year engagements. Because this is the scary part. Anything can happen because you're not in a proper status. Anything can happen during this time. You will, of course, stop being engaged once you are married or you break up. Right? And then when you break up, you go back to the status of a single person, or you get married and now you're a married person. During our own marriage ceremonies, we go through it. So more the bride than the groom, actually. Before the wedding begins, we see everybody except the bride and her party, right? She is separated. She is kept in a special bridal holding chamber, right? So she's separated. Then the ceremony starts. You know it has started because people have assumed their places. There is music. Everyone is already their places. Everyone's there. And then she starts down the aisle. This is really transitionary. This is a really dangerous time. Anything could happen during this time. She approaches the altar and they start saying the words we all know. Right? Do you, right? The whole thing. And then there comes that part. Does anyone here know a reason why these two should not be joined? And we all go, right? We're waiting for the drama. It's really the only reason we go to weddings, right? Is to see, is something going to happen? Oh, it doesn't happen. And then the officiant turns them around and introduces them with their new status. They're now incorporated in the community, but it's something new. Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, right? That's when you know, incorporation has happened. When you're dead, you go through this. So first you die. You are actually separated from the world of the living because you aren't breathing anymore. You're not doing all the things that living people do, like breathe, have a heartbeat. You're physically dead, although you should know that's not an instant thing. It takes time. There are several. Death is a process, not an event. And so, there's cellular death and brain death and all these other things that are going on. So you're going through this cycle. And the thing about this cycle is a lot of times it's reversible. That theory is transitory in itself. But once you are dead, you are not socially dead yet until your ceremony, which is why we have a memorial service or a funeral. Because during the funeral is when we stand in front of everybody and say, this person now belongs to that community, the community of those who have gone before us, right? The community of the dead. And we do this at that service. Now, one of the reasons I do the work that I do as a forensic anthropologist is because families get stuck in this spot. Their kid is gone. They are separated. The kid is gone. And they can't finish that part. They can't get to the incorporating their kid into the world of the dead. They're stuck in limbo because they have Schrodinger's kid. Their kid could be alive and their kid could be dead. And that is not a place you want to be. That is a horrible, horrible place to be. So in telling them, hey, these remains are in fact your offspring, that's terrible to tell somebody, but it's worse to leave them in that spot. I had a mother that I called after, we did a cold case. The person had actually died before I had graduated from high school, so not exactly my case. But they had died with somebody else's ID in their pocket. Happens. And we knew we needed to tell the family that that guy had died, but that guy answered the door. So we knew it wasn't him, because he answered the door. He wasn't dead. His ID was on a dead guy. Which, of course, raises further questions. Hey, what's your wallet doing on a dead guy? But nothing was answered, nothing was fixed. My partner started digging around in a cold case and figured out who the guy was. We dug up his body, and then we sent it off for DNA, made sure, yep, we were sure. Then we called the family. It had been 20 years. When we called the mother, she started laughing. And you know, what the hell's wrong with a mother that would laugh? She was laughing out of relief. Being stuck in transition is horrible. She had been released out of that space. And I was glad to do that for her. So these are important parts of ritual, and many of us will go through them many times in our lives. There's actually a bunch of cultures that think we are absolutely insane because we don't mark one of the more important sets of rituals. We do not mark the transition between childhood and adulthood. Because we are so enamored with staying young. We accelerate our children into this adulthood, but then they have to stay there forever. So we have this tween category. Good God, how rude is that, right? We're going to get 7- and 8-year-old girls wearing booty shorts and lipstick, and then we leave them there in that spot, and we never let them become adults. And many of you are in that right now. Right? You're in college, you're over 18, right? Can you have someone in your room with the door closed? Can you like just bring your friend over and be like, hey, don't mind the noises coming from my room? Your parents would be like, oh, hell no. Right? That is not happening in my house. So, but then they say to you, oh my God, why are you doing this? You're an adult. Apparently I'm not adult enough to fuck in my room. But I'm an adult when you want me to be an adult, right? And you get stuck there. You are in this weird place. Thanksgiving's coming. Watch where you get seated. Are you sitting with the kids? Yeah, you're like, some of you are old enough to drink and you're like, why am I still here? I don't understand this. Why am I not over there? I don't get it. My parents still try to sit me at the kids' table now. And I'm like, oh no. No. I think once you have a child, you shouldn't have to be with them anymore. Right? Because kids, that's Muppet eating. And you work so hard on Thanksgiving, and then suddenly, stuffing is in their hair. That's not what you expected it to be when you started cooking it. So you don't want to watch that, right? You don't want to watch gravy flying. Put that into the table. My parents do it to me. Why? Because I am the youngest. I am the youngest of all the kids. By a large margin. There's 6 years between me and the next kid, and 14 years between me and the oldest kid. So it's a big margin. And they're always like, hey kid, can you do this? My dad calls me, hey kiddo. That's Dr. Kiddo. Right? So I try not to do these very same things to my own kid. I actually thought that, since this is very cruel that we leave kids in this spot, they become teenagers and tweens and not adults for a very long, all their cultures, they go, okay, you walk in the forest, maybe you're gone in the forest for a month. But you come out, you're a man, that's all. Right, you're done. Woman, you start bleeding, hey, done. Maybe a circumcision, but you're done. Right? Nobody goes back and forth, oh, you're an adult, no you're not. No, you're an adult, just kidding. Go ahead, try and rent a car. And the whole adult world goes, no. Right? You want to go have an apartment, you're like, yeah, I'm going to live on my own. And you go out there and you're like, no one will rent to you. Why? Because they don't believe you're really an adult. Yeah, you can vote. Yeah, you can drink. You're not really an adult. Isn't that cute how you think you're all grown up? You don't ever get a time when they tell you it's done. Now for me, I knew when it was done. I know in a minute. March 14th, 1995 at 7:58 p.m. At that moment, I was no longer a child. And why? They handed me a kid and said, Mom, and I went, shit. I mean, no, I was happy, don't get me wrong, I was delighted. But at the same time, I realized as they were handing him to me, that if I killed him, it was unlike any other pet I'd ever had. Pets, if you kill them, you're a bad person, but you don't go to jail. Right? From this point on, I was actually legally responsible and morally responsible to raise this into a person, which meant I had to be an adult person now so that I could raise a little person into being an adult at that very moment. I had already been married 2 years. I was already out of my bachelor's degree. I did not believe I was an adult, like many of you. Right now, if you ask yourself, are you an adult? When you think about it logically, you go, yes, I am over 18, I have these responsibilities, I do these things, I am an adult. And then when you ask yourself, okay, really, are you an adult? You go, no. Not yet. We don't know what the qualities are, but we don't have them. I'm not sure I really am all the time either. I mean, I know the moment it happened, but I also decided it's fluid. Because I certainly have moments where I am 5 years old, but I have a wallet. That might be the difference, right? Like, I'll go to Disneyland when I should be somewhere else because I can drive myself there and pay for it. And I'm like, it's a pleasure being an adult. I'm going to eat all this candy. Whatever. And so that's, but I don't think I've ever really gotten there. And part of that has to do with these things need to be met. I did think about with Spencer forcing him through an adulthood ritual, but I realized if I did that, the rest of the world wasn't going to see it that way. I could do it all I wanted, but a man isn't a man just because I tell him he's a man. Right? I was going to just leave him in the desert. That was my plan. My first plan actually involved locking him in a box, in another box. And once he got out of that box, there were going to be people scaring him, and he was going to fight his demons and then get on the other side, and he would be a man. And then I realized that that was kind of ridiculous, and we don't live in an anime. So then my next plan was I was going to drop him in the desert with a compass, and once he found his way home, he was a man. And then I figured about 16 would be about the right time to do this, because biologically he was becoming a man, so sociologically it was getting there, this would be a good plan. I was then informed that that was totally against the law. So I didn't do that to him. Eventually I had to realize that he was, and I'm still, just like any other parent, not 100% ready to the idea that he's an adult yet, even though I should. I know better. When we don't let our kids grow up, we don't let our kids succeed. There was a religious scholar, his name was Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell said that one of the reasons we have gangs is because gangs allow young men to become men with certainty, and we don't allow that. So I wanted to save my son from this horrible limbo, this horrible purgatory, this horrible transition, which, you know, if we're talking about dead people, that's zombie land. Right? Those are the people who are transitioning, they're not alive and they're not dead. Oh God, horrible. We have a whole show about Walking Dead are people in transition. They're not dead, they're not alive. How can I do this to my son? And then I still find myself doing it. I think some of it's vanity. I want to hold on to my own youth. Right? So as long as I still have a child, I'm still young. Right? Some of that's vanity. Some of it is, I'm his mother. I don't even want him to scrape his knee. Right? And every time I see him start to do something stupid, I go, hey, no, that's dumb. And he goes, oh, I know what I'm doing, Mom. And then I watch him collide, and I go, oh. Yeah, and I never ever let him fall. Never ever. He starts to fuck up, and I'm like, no, it's cool, I got it. Right? Every time. Why? Because I haven't let him. I haven't let him do that into space man thing. So as much as I know better, I'm still an American, right? We have to admit it when we know better, but we still are not doing it right. I hope you make a better plan for your own kids. Before you make a plan for your own kids, you might think about making a plan for yourself. What do you need to do to become an adult? Irreversibly. No one else gets to tell you you're wrong. What do you need to do? Is it math? Is it buy a house? Have a baby? Have a dog? Like, what does it for you? And once you've decided what that is, stick to it. That would be your way of passage. You can make your own. So ceremony, or actually, we're about to do one. We consider it non-religious, but it is. We're about to celebrate Thanksgiving. It's almost Turkey Day. Hey, Turkey Day! Right, it's going to be Turkey Day. So Turkey Day, why do we celebrate it? Do you know? We're celebrating a crisis that happened. We're celebrating a period of starvation that we were safe from. And we celebrate with the feast. Now, we've always had harvest celebrations. Those have always happened. But we've started associating this with a period of our personal, national pluckiness. Look how we didn't die. We don't actually look at it as like, oh, hey, we subjugated a bunch of other people, and look, this was our winning time. We don't have that celebration, but we're like, hey, we stayed alive, yay. So this unites us as a people. Next Thursday, not tomorrow, but next Thursday, we're going to be a people as a nation, right? Everybody, except the poor people who work for bad corporations, right? Everybody will be, hopefully, with their family. And as one, we will all be eating the same food all over the country because we have ritual food, which is why I can substitute Thanksgiving and say Turkey Day, and you know what I'm talking about. We're going to eat this giant bird. which don't feel bad about eating that bird. He is the stupidest bird among birds. You know, turkeys drown when it rains, right? Because they look up. And they can look down. Turkeys help each other to death. Like if one turkey's got a feather that's doing this, the other turkey will come over and peck the feather out because the first turkey needs help. Well, when he does this, the first turkey will bleed a little bit from the plucking of the feather, which then the helper turkey will try and pick the blood off, thereby creating a larger hole which will attract other turkeys to help. And they will peck the other turkey, the first turkey, to death. They have helped their friend to death. We actually refer to this in my house as helping like a turkey. When you're doing something where you're not helping at all, where you are making things so much worse, we're like, oh, you're helping like a turkey. Stop helping like a turkey. Because, you know, turkeys help each other. This is not a bright bird. Eat the bird. Because I'm all about that taste. Right? More fun. Yeah, so it's good. It's good. Now, one more thing. Your book doesn't cover this, but you should know this does get covered in every other culture, anthropology book all over the planet, so I'm sticking it in there. And that is the discussion of witchcraft. When they say witchcraft in anthropology, they do not mean Wiccans like you understand them. They do not mean New Age, love of the earth, crystals, and celebrations of seasonal changes, croning, and all of that stuff. They do not mean that. What they mean is a group of individuals who use magic or the fear of magic to control groups of people. Basically, they are talking about social control. Now, most people who are Wiccans, who would define themselves as witches, would not call someone as they actually, it's a different category. Sorcery and a bunch of other terms. But basically, one of the things is that you can actually, if you are considered powerful even as a shaman or as a group, you can control events and more importantly control people's impression of events. The other thing that witchcraft, the idea of witchcraft in a group can do, can be to control people. So by controlling people, we mean if you call someone a witch, their life is now in danger. And so it can be used to control people's behavior. So like among the Navajo, it's assumed that if you become rich, you became rich because you did something bad. So when you start to become rich, you get rid of your money really fast so that you aren't seen as having done something bad, social control. It's also believed that if you don't take care of your old people, they become witches. So you have to take care of your old people to avoid making your parents or your grandparents into witches. We know about the American history with witchcraft as a use of social control, particularly social control of females, right? Accused of witchcraft, if you sank, you were innocent, and if you floated, you know, like people did, you were guilty of witchcraft and therefore died. Right? People got set aflame, whole families were murdered. There was one village where a teenage girl and her friends systematically called for the deaths of everyone they found inconvenient. And they got away with it. They got away with it. Can you imagine a town in control of 4 bitchy teenage girls? Good God. And that really happened. Now, there were some reasons that people believe this. Remember we talked about confirmation, proof of the supernatural kind of stuff that makes us perpetuate our beliefs. Well, they had 2 problems. One, they had a fungus on their rye. And the fungus, we know it as lysergic acid. LSD. They had LSD on their food. So you are seeing people do trippy shit in front of you. Everybody saw what you saw. So you think about LSD, you go, dude, that guy's face is melting. Everybody looks and everybody sees his face melting. That's pretty awesome. Especially in this sort of semi-controlled hysteria. But people were seeing what they felt were manifestations of power. And they're highly suggestible during those times. The other thing was, there was a liniment, like a lotion, that people used after cleaning. Because you clean your house and then your hands get all dry and cracked. And so you put this liniment on, and particularly like right before you swept, it was the last thing you did, you put this liniment on. And the liniment also had this drug in it that made you feel like you were flying, which is where we get the idea of people flying in brooms. So yeah, this all happened, and it was used as political control. Revitalization movements is a religious movement where people are trying to address some sort of deprivation. Something isn't working. Either they're economically deprived, they don't have enough money, or they're socially deprived, they don't have respect, or they're, something is wrong either orgasmically as an individual, as an organism, organismic, or maybe it's spiritual, but they see badness, and they will create a movement to try to return to a golden age, when things were good. This is when we see a rise of fundamentalism. This is when we see a rise of, again, people using religion as power over other people. We talk about, everything's bad now, everything's sucky. It was good back at this time when we did these things, let's do it like that. But usually that golden age isn't real. It should have never happened. But they're trying to create this mythical utopia that supposedly happened in the past. And we're seeing this all over the world. Every place where things have gotten shitty recently, in any way, things are out of control, we see this really strong attempt to try and return to a golden age, when things were okay. We see things like Westboro Baptist Church and people self-emulating and people having suicide bombers and those kinds of things rise in frequency because they were disrupted in some way. Maybe they were disrupted by another culture coming in, maybe it was us. Maybe they were disrupted economically, maybe they were disrupted anyhow. But they start feeling deprived and they point to all the things that are wrong are because we are doing things wrong. And we see this time and time again throughout history. Every time things get shitty, people start getting more strict religiously. They'll create this moral code of ethics. Sometimes they'll add stuff to the code. And then people will follow this code and hopefully reach a steady state. But usually the things are in transition, so they'll keep making the code more strict. And before you know it, we have this very rigid attachment to religion that is non-adaptive for a species. And we do this because we're afraid. So if you're wondering why on earth, when you look around, there's so, especially among young people, there's so much attachment to fundamentalism, it's fear. It's an attempt to return to a golden age they never lived. And it's not a reasonable response. It must be typical. We see it all over the planet. But it's not the most adaptive response. So, this way we have, it provides meaning, right? Religion becomes a system of meaning for people, but it also becomes a system of power. Don't do it our way. You are threatening the possibility of the return to the golden age. You've got to go. You can see how that would be a problem. So, on that happy-ass note, we don't have very much left, I don't think, right? No. That's it. We already talked about almost all of this except the very last part that you have as a section in your book, so you're fine. All right, so you're on your own for the rest of it. There's very little left. On Monday, we have arts, or is it health? There's one of them. On Monday we have health and illness. I'm actually really excited about this upcoming chapter because I never get it as a chapter. I usually get it as a 20-minute section, and then I get a whole chapter. And this is cool bean stuff. So you're on your way, guys. See you later. Oh, you had stuff for the discussion at 9. Only left 3 minutes for us. So that's not enough. Why don't you pass in what you were planning on doing? This is what they call themselves. This is how we categorize. So you may have someone who's a medium who calls himself a priestess, but we would in Anthro categorize them as medium. They're not wrong in the title calling, it's just not how we would categorize them. So we're going to talk today about mediums, shamans, and priests. We'll start with mediums. Mediums tend to be female, almost always. They tend to be part-time practitioners, which means So they have to have another job. They are usually asked to heal while in a possession trance. So this means they are possessed by the supernatural. They're not going into a transcendental plane and saving you there. The supernatural comes into them, and then they heal you through that. This is something we see commonly in voodoo. We see a lot of this. Voodoo and Santeria, the Loa or the Orishas are the ones who possess your body, and it's called being ridden. You're being ridden by the Loa. And while you're in this trance, usually the person has at least temporary amnesia. They lose time, but typically it's considered a lower level of status than we would see in a priest or an actual priestess. We usually would see these people not quite as well respected. We have a lot of mediums locally in Norco, right on the corner. Right before you turn into school, there's a woman who is a psychic, and she's there to read your cards and your future. She's definitely a medium. She would not qualify in any of the other groups. Priests and priestesses, although I included priestesses because it's the right thing to do, but they're far rarer than priests are. Very, very, very rarely do women reach this status. It's typically males. And they are high-status individuals. They're full-time specialists. They're going to officiate at religious rituals, and they're going to, as we talked about on Monday, sort of have a more, seen as having a more direct line to the supernatural. Put it on, praise for you, that's good news, right? One of the things that identifies a priest and a priestess is that they have a dependence on memorized ritual, which means they do things the same way each time. Often because they're reading from a book, like a Bible or a Quran or a Torah, or because this ritual is always the same. God be with you and also with you, right? This call and responses are always the same. Now, the other thing that's interesting about priests and priestesses is if you make a magical request or a prayer request, they pray for you. Let's say you have a priest in your village, and your village does not have rain, and of course the priest prays for rain, but rain doesn't come. We don't see it as the fault of the priest. We see it as the deity either found the people unworthy or had a reason not to grant the supernatural favor request. Right? So we never ever chase the priest out of town and set him on fire because rain didn't come. He is a conduit, but is not responsible for the actions of the deity. So if you're going to be a religious specialist, that's the one to be. It's got more pay, and it's got more safety. Shaman are individuals who can manipulate the supernatural. They typically more often will use magic commands, and they don't generally get possessed by the supernatural. They usually go into a trance where they go to the supernatural's plane. So they leave their body behind and or have an altered state of consciousness, and they heal at a place you can't see. But most of the shaman will use sleight of hand, look over here stuff. And it's not because they're trying to pretend they did something they didn't, but because most of us need some sort of proof that something happened. So, for example, if you were a kid and you went to curandero and you had susto or you had some other illness and they rubbed the egg over your body and then crack the egg open and you see the egg is rotten inside. Yes, they substituted a perfectly good egg for another egg, but they did not do anything for you. They did. It's just that you needed to see the thing because your belief actually enters very strongly into your healthcare. Typically, this is where we launch into that, but we have a whole chapter on it. However, you should know your religious beliefs, your faith beliefs, have a lot to do with how well or how sick you can be based on what a healer does for you. So in our categorizations, there's actually one more categorized person, And we would actually put them back in priests. For us, medical practitioners, particularly doctors, fall in the categories of priests. They follow memorized ritual. And usually if you fail to get well, it's not because the doctor failed, but because your particular case is not responding. Yeah. So here's a question for you. In acting as a healer, the shaman, 1, provides reassurance. They have shaman in his group. They are and as a kid growing up in the reservation, he couldn't stand the shaman. And he had read anthropological things that said basically like, hey, shaman are people that would otherwise be categorized as nutbags in other cultures, but this is a perfect place for them to fit because of all of their, it's how they cope with their own problems, and this is the kinds of things that he read. He also knew that they did sleight of hand, and so he considered them at their very, very root figures. And so he set out to disprove them. First he went to university and he got a degree. Then he came back, and when he came back to his group, he entered into the training for becoming a shaman with the goal of exposing these frauds. He became the best shaman he's ever had. And he will fully admit, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just right in front, but it actually works. So I think that speaks well for that. Okay, I'm going to start the timer. Remember, as anthropologists, we're intensely concerned with what does it mean to be human, and how anthropology works, and how religion works into that. You know, how do we study that? How do we keep an open mind? This is actually harder than it may seem. Can you see past this thing? Okay. This is, it's harder than it seems. When you are a child, you are inculcated into your own religion, right? You are brought up, and one of the tenets of every religion is, our way's the right way, everyone else is wrong, right? That's an important part of every religion. We have the corner on the truth. So, as an anthropologist, from the very beginning, we have to be able to put aside all of our beliefs and go watch a new group and understand their beliefs and why their beliefs work for them. One of the hardest places for us to do that is in religion. And actually, there's one place where it's even harder for us. If we have a bias, if we have a fault, and I'm going to say we do, but it's not even if, we do. Here's a group of individuals that are sort of antithetical to the anthropologist. So the job of the anthropologist is to go to a culture, study them, write about them, consult them, of course, on our writings, and return and tell the story. We're the Boy Scouts, if you will, of the social sciences, and that we take only pictures and we leave only footprints, right? Do not change the culture. Do not. With this sort of belief that we have, that cultures in themselves are sort of like organisms, and if you mess up one part, you're gonna kill it. You're gonna kill it, right? We've all seen Star Trek episodes where this happens. Okay. So there's a group of people whose goal it is, every time they come to a new culture, to change them. They're called missionaries, right? The goal of the missionary is to bring their God to a new group, which will radically, because religious belief is fundamental to how the system, the social system works, will radically change them. So most anthropologists, when you say, hey, missionaries are going into this area, we go, ah! Like, stop! You bad people! And I have to confess that we may be wrong about that. I'll tell you a story. So, a long time ago, I was teaching at Cerritos College, and I used to ask the students when I had classrooms that only had 30 people in them, and I had a chance to get to know everybody. On the first day of class, I would ask that question. You always hate your professors asking you, why are you taking this class? And really, you just want to go, because dude, I need the credits, but that sounds rude, right? So you're like, oh, because I'm interested in people. I've always wanted to know. You know, like you're trying to make shit up on the spot. And that's another reason I don't ask this question anymore, because it's like, let's start the first day full of lies. I'd rather you guys didn't like it. So
But this one kid raises his hand. He goes, well, I'm about to become a missionary, and I want to learn cultural anthropology so that I can better get my message of God across. Oh, no, you don't. You are not, I am not teaching you the tools of subjugation. And I literally flipped out. I mean, like, on the spot, lost my shit. This was a new job, too. Lost my shit, made him leave the classroom. Like, I lost it. Okay, in my defense, I was 24 years old, and the world was a lot more black and white at 24 years old, right? So, and I was like, hey, you're a horrible person, get out of my classroom. He leaves. But as he's leaving, he says, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can make me leave your classroom because of my religious beliefs. And as he's saying that, I realized, of course I can't. Right? Like, that is, wow. But I still make him leave. He comes to my office every day after class to, make sure he understands the information. Every single day I have to spend a half an hour with this kid I hate. Right? And I'm trying to be as unfriendly as possible. And sadly, the truth is he's sponging this up. Like, he's really good at this. And so I'm like, all right, fine. I will teach you because I am a teacher. I hate you. I hate you so much. Towards the last third of the semester, he comes in and he says, I see your point. The point of my missionaryism is to change cultures, and if I do this, I could kill people. Yes. Yes. It's a little far, but yes. I don't say it's a little far. I'm like, yes, you'll do murder. And he's like, well, I spent some time, we talked about religion, and I realized that everybody's got a piece of the elephant, like you said, and I'm wrong, and I've given up on my religion. And I said, what? And he says, yes, I think it's all lies now. And I said, wait, I think I might have made a mistake. No, I mean, your God, it's really important to you. And he was like, well, yeah, because my wife was going on a missionary with me, and now she's divorcing me and taking my child, but I think you're right. I think this is the right path. And the whole time I'm like, no, 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 oh, no, I can't even tell you how wrong I am right now. I am wrong, I am wrong. I don't want you to change people, but this is bad. I went too far. I did exactly to you what I do not want you to do to other people. Oh my God, what did I do? What did I do? And that's what happened. Ultimately, he, by the way, became a fine anthropologist. He did. He actually finished his doctorate before me. Because, life is funny. But I can never forgive myself. I fucked him up. And I am totally admitting this right here in front of you. Like, I am an ass. Right? Okay, so this is why when we talk about, missionaries are the devil. I'm like, missionaries can be the devil. They don't have to necessarily be, and I have had students here at Norco who came here because missionaries taught them to read and write wherever they were, and they came to the States to continue that education. That's great. That's fantastic. There are times when they kill people. Okay, it's true. Sometimes accidentally, like they'll go to an island and they'll bring disease with them, not knowing they are diseased, right? But that can happen to any explorer of any kind. But sometimes they do things that don't work, like in Tikopia, for example. Tikopia was a double whammy. In Tikopia, so this reverend comes, actually I think he was a deacon. He came to Tikopia and there were 6 chiefs on the island. And he went to each of the 6 chiefs and said, your God is wrong. I brought the right God. And if you don't follow my ways, you're going to hell. And all 6 chiefs went, thank you, no. We're fine the way we are, and we don't need your God. And he said, okay, but you're going to go to hell. Well, he didn't know it, but he was carrying the measles. So 4 of the 6 chiefs died from the measles that he brought. And that obviously convinced the other 2 chiefs, your God is much more powerful than my God because you're going to smote all of my people for not believing. So they convert. The original native religion in Tikopia had infanticide as part of its religious belief system. Like, if you had twins, you had to kill them both because one didn't have a soul. Very common, right? And this kept the island population to a reasonable size for the island. Catholicism has no population control in it. It is be fruitful and multiply, which is what they did. They were fruitful, they multiplied themselves into creating a desert island that no one can live on anymore. In fact, the entire culture decimated 2 generations. So those are examples where I can go, missionary, no, bad, wrong, newspaper speak. Not a good idea. And that's the, those were the examples I was raised on as an anthropologist. So you can see where this cultural relativism suddenly gets suspended as soon as it's somebody else coming in. So like when I look at the culture, I go, oh, this culture's great, it's doing fantastic. And then the missionary comes in, which is going to result in culture change, right? I go, oh no, your way is wrong, stupid, bad, I have judgment for you. You can see where we have this problem. So I'm admitting to you, there's cross-purposes happening here. But on the whole, when we stand back, and now having had the education that I had in graduate school, we stand back and use all of our tools, our entire toolbox, we recognize that cultures, of course, constantly change, right? Change is the rule, not staying the same is weird. Change is the rule. So then, how do we apply the toolkit without applying our previous biases about machines? So, we needed to reach into some other groups. Do you remember we talked about Durkheim on Monday? We talked about the idea, he wrote that book, Suicide, about enemy, not having enemy, the need for community. Remember this? Okay, good. He wrote a book called The Sacred and the Profane. Of course, he writes it in French. He translated it into The Sacred and the Profane. And he talks about how we see the world in this dialectic, that there is that which is sacred and that which is profane. By profane, you don't mean necessarily bad. Profane can mean ordinary, but it is not holy. So your religious symbol, sacred. The symbol for a Monster Energy drink, profane. Right? And we will make these divisions in our lives between that which is sacred and that which is profane. And by recognizing what people single out, it helps us understand their religious framework. It helps us identify between profane ritual and religious ritual. It helps us get a better grasp of what it is that what needs the religion is fulfilling. I definitely look at religion from a structural functionalist point of view, that it serves a purpose. Of course, there are lots of people who say, no, the only purpose that it serves, especially the author of your textbook, right? The purpose that religion serves is to oppress people. Again, Karl Marx never said that religion was the opiate of the masses. Do you know what that actually means? An opiate is a drug, right? And so it's the drug of the masses. In other words, so they don't have to think and they don't have to feel. They use religion to think and feel for them. And he definitely intimated this in the Communist Manifesto. This is long, he gets there the long way around. But he never actually says these words. But his argument was that really religion no longer has, organized religion no longer has a place in our societies because A, we no longer believe in the supernatural because we have science. Again, that false dichotomy that creates so much problems. And a belief in the supernatural can be used by others to oppress them. Especially because usually your religious officiants are interpreting the texts for you. And they will interpret them as they see fit. Right? We've all been paying extra attention to this right now because we're undergoing a personal cultural change. Gay marriage right? And so we're actually going back to Christian texts, since it's actually a Christian movement that's trying to keep gay marriage from happening. We go back to the text and we read the text, but most of us don't actually do that. We listen to other people, religious officiates who we admire, priests, and we let them interpret it for us. And they tell us what we're supposed to believe. And it's almost like we look at the book as unavailable to us, and only these smart religious scholars can tell us what they say. And in that respect, Karl Marx had a point. We do that. It's almost a lazy kind of thinking, where, I'm sure you guys have all seen that pastor. Oh my God, he's so insane. Isn't that the New Grace Church? He's actually crazier than the Westboro Baptist people. Like he's been getting on television. He's a sort of middle-aged, elderly African American man who is what do you say? He had a sign on the outside of his church that said, "Black women, be aware, white men are taking all your men." Right, like that white gay men were just taking all of the available black men around. Yeah, and he's said a lot of things that were really horrible. And he says that all of this is backed up with testament from the New Testament, and it's all there. And his followers believe him, and I don't understand why. And then I do, because he's charismatic, which is usually what a religious leader is going to be. And people buy what you sell them. I've gotten into religious arguments with students when they were like, well, it says in John 3:16, and I'm like, well, what about Timothy 4:20? They go, oh yeah, you have a point. I just picked one random ass piece out of nowhere. I picked a book and some numbers, and they said yes, which shows you they don't actually know their book. What I know about the book of Timothy is that it says that thou shalt not suffer woman to teach. Oh, you guys are all busted. You just suffered a woman to teach. Right, that is the only one I know in there. But for the most part, people will let other people interpret it, and when they do that, they allow either themselves or other groups to be oppressed. And that's a problem. Okay, so the other thing that Marx was coming up with was that there's a material culture that's associated with religion. You know, in this case, they show a sacred cow that is an actual sacred cow. You've heard the term sacred cows? They're sacred cows. Sacred. And there are often trappings that go with religion that distinguish those who are practitioners from those who aren't. There are super churches in China and Korea that are there specifically because they want the trappings of the Western world. They want the material culture that goes with it. So if the Christian God's going to get you those things, go do that. Think about the Catholic Church for a moment. Let us for a moment consider the Vatican. Okay? Beautiful building, right? Gorgeous. Absolutely golden inside. Just so sumptuous. And even though the church has sumptuary laws, they have, this absolute wealth to show you. And that wealth in itself can be oppressive. And then, of course, Max Weber argued about the Protestant ethic. We talked about him during our discussion on economics, but he did specifically write the Protestant ethic. And he's talking about Protestant churches, so non-Catholics, and the idea that work hard equals success. And he was talking about things that impeded that possibility. Shamanism doesn't fit into this picture at all, but boy, I sure love this picture. And of course, religion and magic don't finish in that either. We're going to talk about religion and magic in a minute. So this idea that if you believe in God and you work hard, you will be successful, not necessarily a dovetail. So what E. Evans Pritchard was talking about, and there's a really great film in his voice
called Witchcraft Among the Azande. He narrates that he lived among the Azande, and so he was this, well, now he's dead, but even at the time, he was a sort of like elderly British man. So he's got all of the conveys authority because he's an elderly British man. When an elderly British man speaks, you know that guy must be smart automatically, because we hear old British men, we go, yes, those people must know what they're talking about. We respect that authority linguistically right away. But he has a whole museum basically to himself at Cambridge. I went to visit it. It was very cool. It was very cool. It's a very small museum, but it was very cool. And he did all of these studies among the Azande, and we talked about the Azande before a little bit. You know, these are the folks that poison the chickens, right? And they use abene and dengue and termite mounds and all kinds of ways to try to control the supernatural. We don't. Oh, George, I'm going to skip Paul Stoller. George Knowles writes. He wrote an article called "Baseball Magic." Baseball magic was all about the stuff that we were talking about on Monday, right? All about all the things you try to do to control the uncontrollable. All the little rituals that you do. That, you know, right, yesterday, day before, or something like that, there was a big football game where one group lost to the other group, and they were, oh, actually, here's a good one. This is more local. The RCC Tigers just won against Chaffey, and Chaffey College. And there was a bet apparently going between the two board of trustees. I was at the board of trustees meeting last night, and the losers, who were Chaffey, had to come and pay their respects. And one of the things that the president of Chaffey said was, "I forgot to wear my lucky socks. It's my fault." Right? As he was passing out the gifts to the president, actually really the chancellor of the board of trustees, who, by the way, gave him a gift right back, which I thought was nice. He gave him a RCC Tigers baseball hat that he can wear until his team wins again. It's quite proud of us. All right. So rituals, if we were to define ritual in itself, it's an act that is repeated, right? It's going to have stylized gestures. Here's a perfect example. I take a small hog's bristle brush, I stick it in my mouth, remember, ritual, body ritual among the Nasarima, and I go like this, and I go like this, and I go like this, and I do it the same way all the time, right? I did all these stylized gestures as part of my cleansing ritual. Was that a religious ritual? No, it was not, because it was not sacred. It was profane. Right? But it's still a ritual. It still counts. A religious ritual is going to have religious symbols associated with it. There is going to be the symbol of the religion. There are going to be components that are symbolic within the religion. So we're going to have some combination of prayer and magic and sacrifice to make that happen. Now, if you were to ask anyone in a Christian-based religion whether or not magic is part of their religious rituals, they would say no. It's actually a forbidden thing in the text. Right? You must not perform magic. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Also mentioned. And yet, they do. There's magic. There's like 2 sets in most ceremonies. Okay, so let's say we're going to talk about baptism of a baby, right? So you take the baby and you say the words, and the community says, we accept this baby. That's actually what it's for, right? The religion, this ritual, this sacred ritual is, there is a new member of our community. And then the whole community says, yes, you remember? You are one of us. That's what a baptism is. But the ritual that is done to make the baptism a baptism is you're washing away the original sin. Every child is born with the sin of Adam and Eve, eating the apple. Having sex. Right, the original sin.
And that's when they figured out they were naked, right? So you take the baby and you wash the original sin off their head. That's called imitative magic. The thing you are doing resembles the results you want. You are washing, and what you want is clean, right? So it's imitative magic. However, it has a religious component that is non-magic because we assume that if the priest does it wrong, like let's say you've got a drunken dude for a priest, right? And he's had a little too much ceremonial wine, and he's baptizing the baby, but he says the words wrong and he's swaying. We assume that the God that we are baptizing this baby for will not reject the baptism. In that respect, it does not necessarily dovetail exactly with magic. Because with magic, if you don't get what you want, it's because you did it wrong. And if you do it wrong, you probably won't get what you want. You'll get unexpected. The blood of Christ and the little wafers in front of him to his flesh. It is absolutely believed that these are now blood and flesh. And then every member of the community comes up and drinks the blood and eats the flesh. I know that sounds very weird, but it's not, actually. It is not an act of cannibalism, although it is symbolic cannibalism. It is not cannibalism. What it is taking, basically it's a big community thing, bringing that person back into yourself, bringing the holy person into you, right? So it is eating of our own, getting our own back. That's all. We wouldn't eat other people, and this person especially. So we eat their body. I have a friend who she was a nun. She's not a nun anymore. But when she was a nun, she would take all the kids in for before they started school. They had mass every day at this Catholic school, and one of the kids, they put the wafer in her mouth, and she was like, and walks out of the room and spits the wafer in the bush. She didn't like it. Of course, this upset the nuns terribly because she has just spit the body of Christ. And it's very literally the body of Christ. So there's like 4 nuns sitting there for the rest of the afternoon picking out all of the pieces of the body of Christ out of the bushes. Because this little girl had done this. And the girl figured out that if she did this, they didn't have afternoon lessons. Because all the nuns were working on getting, so every day she would be like, and she would spray it in ever more creative places that it would become more difficult to get it out so that she didn't have to have afternoon lessons. So that would be an example, if you will, of religious ritual also having a magical component to it. And you could probably think of hundreds more. So prayer in itself, prayer is, remember we talked about that on Monday? You're going to make a request, you're going to praise, you're going to plead. Now, can you make your prayer more powerful without doing magic? Yes. How do you do it? Sacrifice. Sacrifice. And you say, wait, we know something to do. There's a sacrifice in almost every religion that is there to increase the efficacy of your prayers. Because when you pray, whether or not it happens is dependent on the will of the supernatural, right? Supernatural says yes or no. So how do you sweeten the deal? Kill an animal, a life for a life, that's one way, right? In multiple texts, deities really like the smell of burning animals, and so you burn them and send the smell up. In voodoo, you have to give the loa the booze they like. In fact, you're talking to specific loa, so if you don't give them the booze they like, will be it up to you. So you may pour champagne or bourbon or whatever into whatever location these loa are found. Sacrifice. Many of you are very familiar with sacrifice because you usually use behavior rather than animals. So let's say it's a weekend, and let's say you've been drinking, and let's say you know a whole lot better, but you got behind the wheel of the car. And you knew better. A whole way home, what are you doing? Oh God, please. I promise I'll never do this again. I swear I will never do this again. If you just let me get home safe. I swear to God, I will never do this again. Or when you're throwing up because you have overindulged, you might start making some real agreements there, right? I swear I'll never do this again. If you just let me live, I'll never do this again. I am vomit adverse. I think I've told you guys this. I don't do it well. And I have more than once promised Spencer into the priesthood. Yeah. Because I always believe I'm going to die, and about the only time I get really, really big on sacrifice is when I start vomiting. And when I start vomiting, I'm always like, we'll give Spencer over to the priesthood, but then I vomit, and I consider the deal null and void, right? The deal was, I don't throw up, Spencer goes into the priesthood. If I throw up, deal null and void. I throw up, deal null and void. So far, I don't think he wants to, Spencer. So we do these sacrifices. We typically sacrifice behavior. I'm not going to do this if you'll do this. Sometimes we do sacrifice to increase the overall efficacy of our prayer. We're not trying to sacrifice for a specific thing, but in general. Those are usually done in ritual, regularized periods like Ramadan or Lent, right? Where you don't do a thing, you sacrifice a thing. And it makes you better, which increases the efficacy of your prayers. Right? You don't do the thing that makes you better. You're a little holier, and your request is more likely to get granted. So, sometimes the sacrifices are quite significant. Like the Aztecs absolutely believed that if they did not sacrifice a person, the sun would not come up. And in some ways they were not wrong. They stopped sacrifice just as their culture was dying. Right? Just as the last of them were being expunged. They stopped sacrificing, but they were right up until the very end. So for them, they did stop sacrificing, and the sun did stop coming up for them. So they may not be wrong. So maybe you think, if I get away with this, I will give up smoking. If I get away with this, I will give up drinking. If I get away with this, I swear I'll never do this one thing again. And all of that is considered sacrifice. Oh, the other time I get on sacrificing. I love traveling. I love going places, right? I told you, the adventure, I get so excited. I do not love turbulence, though. Like when the plane starts to do this, I hate that. I have cleaned up too many people after plane crashes, I think, to trust that it's always going to be okay. So that's about the time I really start, I don't typically pray, but I get very critical right at that point. Remember how I was raised by a Methodist grandma and a Catholic grandma? This is back to Freud's reversion of childhood feelings. I get scared, and suddenly I am Hail Mary, full of grace, and I know all the words, and I'm like flipping through invisible rosaries that I could just about feel, and I work all the way through that. And then once I'm done with those, I move on to any religion I can remember as prayers. And I just start working my way through ritualized prayer. I'm like, I don't know which one you are, or whatever it is. Listen and don't kill me. And so far it's worked. Right? I'm still here. I have learned never to fly in and out of Denver. In Denver, Colorado, going into the airport is always up and down drafts. So you're always riding a kangaroo on the way in. And riding a kangaroo on the way out, and I don't want to do that anymore. I'm skipping that part. So that's not as a result of prayer. That's a result of doing some research. Why is it every time I go into Denver I think I'm going to die? That's why. All right. So magic is when people do or perform certain rituals or say certain words that they believe will compel the supernatural to act in a certain way. Colloquially, we love this idea. We have television shows about, people who can perform magic. Doctor Who isn't really magic. He's extra technology from ahead of time, right? I would say the last really good show we had about magic was Bewitched. I was like, that one was a good one. Oh, and of course, I Dream of Jeannie, right? She also performed magic. But what was fun about Bewitched, if you ever get to watch it on Nick at Night, it's every third show or so is magic goes wrong.
right? There's an aunt who can never say the incantations right because she forgets them. She's clearly got Alzheimer's. And there's another aunt who has a sneezing problem. So she'll sneeze in the middle of incantations, and then hilarity ensues, right? Because the incantation is done incorrectly. Oh, it's hilarious. It actually is quite funny. At least, watch 4 shows though, and you've got the whole thing. There were like 7 seasons. You only need to watch like 4 shows, and then you're good. So they did all kinds of memorized ritual. They would say certain words. And we get the idea that that's what is done actually from Shakespeare. Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, fire burning, cauldron, bubble, fillet of a finny snake in the cauldron, boil and bake. Right, the whole Macbeth 3 witches thing. They say these ritualized words. Now we know that ritualized words have been said in order for a long, long time, but the idea that we have these women in pointy hats sit around a cauldron and do this thing is Shakespeare. And pointy hats were just old-fashioned hats of them. But now they're witches' hats. So I really appreciate the way I laid this slide out. I hope you do too. Imitative magic. In imitative magic, like I've been telling you, the thing you do resembles the results you want. So here we may talk about a voodoo doll. Let's not talk about why it works. Let's talk about what you do. Now voodoo dolls, by the way, not actually really used by practitioners. There are dolls, bochi, that are used in a different way. But we get this idea from Maya Deren does a film about, actually it's a kind of amazing film, about being written by the law, and it was very sensationalized. But we get this idea that people poke voodoo dolls with pins, but you know how it works. So you get a voodoo doll, you poke it with a pin, and the person hurts where you poke them. That's imitative. The thing you do resembles the results you want. The baptism, that's imitative. There's an actual voodoo ritual where if you have, by the way, you should be careful, don't do this one. If you're like, Dr. Gray taught me this ritual, remember that everything comes in 3s. If you do something bad to somebody, it comes back to you in 3 according to voodoo understanding. So forcing someone to do something against their own will, that's a bad thing. That's denying someone their free will. So you will get bad for doing this. But one of the rituals that can be done if you want to bind yourself to someone else, you want someone else to want you, their underwear and a pair of your underwear, both warm, of course, and they get tied together. There's a bunch of other stuff that has to happen. I'm telling you all of it, but it gets tied together in a knot. That tying together in a knot is the imitation. The results you want resemble what you're doing. You're tying the 2 together. Yeah, it's a thing. And the reason it works is because of contagious magic, because in the voodoo pantheon, contagious magic is very important. Contagious magic is that an item that comes in contact with someone retains a magical connection. So if you had a voodoo doll, the only way the voodoo doll works is if you have something of the person, right? The reason the tying of the underwear works is you grab their underwear, and their underwear then, because they've worn it, has a connection to them. We believe this as a culture, not quite in the level of if I have your hair, I can now cause you pain, but why do we like signed things? We like autographed things because they retain a connection, right? You know for sure that that person held that thing because they signed it, right? So it retains a connection to them. And that's when we think they're special. The Asaro of New Guinea, when after a baby is born, they take the placenta and the umbilical cord and they hide it because they believe it retains a connection to the individual and that you can turn the individual into a puppet if you have it. If you have the sac they were born in, you can make them do anything you want because you have the sac they were born in, right? That's because of contagious magic. In the South, and if you get your hair cut in a salon, they will return your hair to you. or they will burn it in front of you. You have a choice. You can have whatever you want, but it's usually returned to you because there is a belief that A, your hair is powerful, and B, even if a human doesn't wish you harm, a bird can fly off with your hair, put it in a nest, and make you crazy. And I will tell you, even hardened Americans will believe this, and I'll tell you why. Well, not why. I'll tell you a story. So, a long time ago, I had a boyfriend who I adored, but ultimately it all ended in tears, you know, like you do. And while we were still all schmoopy and schmooptastic over each other, where we were still like, I love you, you know, that part. So while we were all doing that, I cut his hair for him because I actually can't do that, and exercise skill. And he didn't want to pay for money to cut his hair. Besides, we were doing fun stuff with it. So I tied off a lock of it when I cut it, and I was like, I will keep a lock of your hair close to me. And he was like, that's so sweet. And I was like, isn't it? Right? Well, when we broke up, he didn't ask for anything back of his except his hair. And he was like, I don't trust you. I was like, what am I going to do with your hair? He goes, I don't know, but you know, because at that point I had been studying with the voodoo practitioner at school for a while, and he was like, you're going to do something with my hair, aren't you? And I was like, you know what? It hadn't occurred to me, but now it has. Because I was the jilted one, so I was all like, no, you know what? I don't think so. I'll keep your hair. Thank you. And for years, he was like, I would really like my hair back. And I was like, I bet you would.